Hi everyone. Today's episode is guaranteed to keep you on your toes. I have 3 stories that will challenge your mind and keep you puzzled until there aren't any pieces left. You might even find that you're missing a few pieces. But first, cover up those toes and get them comfortable because they are about to be busy. But first, please tickle that subscribe button. Great. Now let's get into the stories. Okay, so it was the summer of 2021, and I decided to take a hiking trip to Yosemite National Park. Now, I've been on plenty of hikes in national parks before, but this was my first time at Yosemite, and I was psyched up to explore the iconic national park. So there I was on the first day, kitted up in my hiking gear and standing at the foot of Half Dome, looking up at the grandeur. And let me tell you, nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the sheer scale of that granite rock face. It's like staring up at a giant monolith touching the skies. I started off on the Mist Trail, one of the most popular trails in the park. It's not an easy trail, mind you. It's about 14 miles round trip, but the views of Vernal and Nevada Falls are totally worth the sweat. Now, as I was hiking, I couldn't shake off this peculiar feeling. You know, that feeling when you sense that somebody's eyes are on you, but when you turn around, there's nobody there. It wasn't anything too unsettling, just a mild prickle at the back of my neck. I thought it was just the excitement of the new trail and the anticipation of the journey ahead. After about 3 miles in, the trail gets pretty steep. And here's where the story gets interesting. So I was climbing up this steep trail, and all of a sudden I spotted this tiny movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, trying to get a better look, but all I saw was a flash of brown disappearing into the undergrowth. Now, being in Yosemite, I knew that it could be any host of things. A deer, a bobcat. But there was something odd about that fleeting glimpse, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. So with my heart pounding a bit, I decided to press on, because that's what you do when you're hiking, right? You keep moving. I convinced myself it was probably just a deer, but that feeling, that strange feeling of being watched, didn't go away. Now, as I was moving closer to Vernal Fall, the trail became narrower and the surroundings quieter. It was almost serene except for the steady noise of the waterfall breaking the silence. And then, out of nowhere, I heard this weird rustling sound from behind me. I swear my heart almost leapt out of my chest. I turned around, slowly, half expecting to see a bear standing there, and to my surprise, I saw nothing. Just the usual undergrowth, a few trees, and the trail that I had been walking on. The rustling sound had stopped. I must admit it spooked me a bit. But then again, I was in the heart of Yosemite, surrounded by nature and its inhabitants. It's not entirely unusual to hear strange sounds or feel a bit on edge. So I just shook off the eerie feeling and I continued. But that's when things took a really weird turn. As I got closer to the falls, I saw this thing. I'm not exactly sure what it was. It was standing near the water, almost blending in with the rocks. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As my eyes focused, I realized it was not a rock. It wasn't an animal. It was, well, a figure. And it was standing upright like a human, but it looked all wrong. It was about my height, maybe a bit taller, but its limbs were elongated and kind of distorted. Its skin was grayish-brown, almost like tree bark, and it was uncannily thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. The body was angular, with joints sticking out in weird places, like its anatomy didn't follow the laws of nature or something. But the face was the most disturbing part. It was flat, with these 2 dark holes for eyes. No nose, no mouth, just these deep black pits. And it was just standing there, staring at me with those hollow eyes. Now, I've been around the block a few times and I've seen my share of oddities, but this was different. This was bone-chillingly strange. The air around me suddenly grew cold and I felt this wave of unease wash over me. I stood there, rooted in the spot, caught between curiosity and fear. We must have stayed like that in a silent standoff for what felt like an eternity. The figure never moved. It just stood there at the edge of the falls, blending with the shadows. But then slowly, very slowly, it started to move. Not towards me, but towards the water. It moved in this strange, sort of disjointed manner, like it wasn't used to moving in its own body. And with each step it took, I could hear this faint, gravelly sound, like the rustling of dry leaves. And then just as it was about to reach the water, it stopped. And I kid you not, it turned its head and looked back at me, with the dark, empty eyes looking into mine. I felt this cold shiver run down my spine again. And in that moment, it was like time had stopped. It was just me and this bizarre creature locked in this silent confrontation in the heart of Yosemite. And then as quickly as the thing appeared, it leapt into the water. I was left standing there in complete and utter shock. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating. I was struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I looked around, half expecting it to pop back out of the water, but there was nothing. Only the rush of the waterfall and the chirping of the birds, like it had never been there in the first place. Strange. I never saw that creature again for the rest of my hike. I don't know what it was or where it came from, but that encounter left a deep impression on me. It reminded me that nature is full of mysteries, some beautiful, some terrifying, and some that defy all explanation. Hi, Lilith. I think my affinity for these stories began when I saw my first cryptid back in 1973. I was only 11 years old, but that day has stuck with me for my entire life. The image of the creature was burned into my mind, and I became mildly obsessed with trying to see it again. Well, now it's nearly 50 years later, and yesterday, I came into contact with this beast once again. I was born and raised in Albany, New York, and I've always been curious about nature and animals. I spent a great deal of time exploring the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. We're situated right between the Catskills and the Adirondacks, and there are tons of trails throughout the area. I'm going to start with my first interaction with the creature way back when, and then tell you all about what went down yesterday. It was the 1970s, so things were a bit more wild and free. I would spend most of my days running around with friends and my brother in the city and the surrounding suburbs, buying candy and playing pranks on the store owners. Some summers we would stay over at my aunt's house, which was just down the road from Pine Bush. The summers were amazingly fun, and we felt like we had a whole preserve to ourselves. After what we encountered, I knew that wasn't true. The most interesting part of the preserve are the sand dunes. And now we are right smack dab in the middle of upstate New York. You don't expect the soil to look like a beach. The barren sands are often going up in smoke since they're so dry and desolate. But there's a great deal of critters living in these woods, even on the dunes. So I went out exploring one day by myself because my brother was at horse camp or something. I was walking through the sandy terrain when I saw a dog on the top of a dune. I tried calling over to it, thinking it had gotten lost or away from its owner. It didn't move when I called, so I started towards it. From a distance, it looked like any old dog, maybe a greyhound or a Rottweiler, or a massive Chihuahua. It was skinny, and I could see the shadows of its ribcage sticking out from under its skin. It was blackish-brown with tall legs and a long snout. And as I walked towards it, it began to growl at me. I started to see it clearer now, and it had a scaly reptilian skin, and it was definitely not a dog. I was a scared little kid at the time, so I backed away slowly. Well, actually, I think any sane person would have done the same. And then the thing started to move towards me, and it moved low to the ground, and it stuck out this long pink tongue. I turned to run. I never looked back. I don't think it ended up chasing me, and I never saw it again. And like I said, this day stuck in my mind for the rest of my life. I told my friends and my family about what I'd seen. Nobody believed me. They thought I was making the story up for attention. I never went walking in the woods after that, but for the rest of my life, I stayed curious. In all those years, it wasn't until just yesterday that I saw it again. I was driving past the preserve on my way to make some deliveries. I work as a postman these days, and I take a few routes that take me out into the more desolate parts of the county. I was going about 65 when I spotted it, but I slowed down right away. There was a dead deer carcass on the side of the road. It had been there for at least a day. I'd seen it as I passed by the day before. It was bloated and very clearly a buck, decently sized with a pair of half-grown antlers. The creature that I saw was ripping at it, and it was barely recognizable as a deer at this point. It sunk its teeth in, and it used its long tongue to lap at the coagulated blood. It was disgusting. I looked at it in my rearview mirror, and I just could not believe it. I started to put my truck into reverse so I could get a closer look. I pulled back slowly, but the thing did not pay any attention that I was getting closer. My windows were open, the smell of rotting flesh and sewage wafted into the truck. I tried to hold my breath, but it was just a horrible smell that started to make my eyes water. It was so bad. I closed them for a moment to try to push out the tears, and when I opened them again, the creature was approaching my car. I sat there for a moment and I stared at it. It walked right towards my truck's door and sat just about 6 feet away. Now I got a really good look at the thing, and I didn't even have a chance to notice the smell because my heart was racing so fast. This thing was hideous and drooling. Its entire face and neck and chest were covered in the blood and guts of the deer. Its ears flicked back and forth, and its back arched like it was going to pounce. Once I saw that, I knew I had to get out of there. I stepped on the gas, and it started actually chasing after me. I thought maybe I could lead it into town or towards the ranger station so someone could get a photo or shoot it. I kept starting and stopping, going at about 30 miles an hour, and the thing was keeping right up with me. Eventually, another car started to come towards me, and I flashed my brights to signal them. Once the thing heard the engine of that car, it ducked back into the brush, and it was gone, and I don't think that car even got a look at it. Probably didn't even know what was going on. I hope maybe they did, though, so at least someone else will know what I'm talking about. My family is pissed that I'm back at it again with this thing, but I hope you guys will appreciate the story. Let me know what you think. Hi, Lilith. I need to tell you something that happened to me last year. I was sitting on my porch at my house in Washington State late at night when I heard a high-pitched whirring noise, and then I saw something quite strange. It was a vibrant blue light that appeared to be spinning, and it slowly went higher up into the sky and gradually spun faster and faster. Eventually it disappeared behind a cloud, and the whirring noise stopped. Fascinated, I continued looking, waiting for the light to come back, but it didn't. And then suddenly I heard a huge explosive boom, and the cloud lit up this bright green color. It was so bright it was blinding. The blue light was spinning so fast it looked like a bright star shooting across the sky. The green light that followed was just as spectacular. It lit up the entire cloud in this brilliant hue, and it created this incredible spectacle. I stood there amazed at the sight, completely mesmerized. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Afterwards, I saw green lights falling from behind the clouds towards the ground, and I remember thinking that somebody has to be playing a prank on me. But it was far too epic to be any kind of a simple prank. I remember being concerned if some of the green debris would fall on somebody's house or cause a fire, but there was really nothing I could do. I was in awe, and I couldn't stop gazing and wondering if I was even dreaming. I thought that was going to be the most eventful part of the night, but I was wrong. Something quite disturbing happened afterwards. A strange-looking black van drove slowly into the field in front of my house. The windows were all blacked out, and it drove very slowly. Now, I don't get many visitors in this area. Nobody really lives around me, so I got very weirded out by the van. It disturbed me enough that I went into the house, locked the door, and looked out the window. The van sat in the field for about 10 minutes. Finally, I decided maybe I was being paranoid and just fixed myself some tea. But while drinking it, I kept trying to come up with a logical explanation for what I had seen in the sky. But for the life of me, I couldn't explain it. It had to be extraterrestrial. Either that or it had been some strange experimental government aircraft. But why the green explosion? I looked out the window again about 30 minutes later, and the van was still sitting in the field. I called my husband, who works as a truck driver and was in a different state at the time, and I asked him what I should do. He told me it was probably nothing, but to keep watching and call him if anything did happen. I hung up and tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went back outside and sat down on the porch. My mind was racing with the possibilities of who was in the van. I eventually told myself it was just some teenagers doing, teenage things in the field and laughed it off. The van suddenly then began to move. I told myself that the teenagers had finished whatever they had come to do, and a sense of relief came over me. Then it drove very slowly in the direction of my house and then stopped right in front. Now my heart started pounding as I was wondering what was going on, and suddenly all the doors of the van opened and 4 men dressed in black suits with sunglasses jumped out. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. They were all holding guns and they started running at me. As they came closer, I could see that their faces were covered with masks. I tried to run into the house, but one of them grabbed me and dragged me back outside. They took me to the van and forced me inside. The last thing I saw before they shut the door was 4 more men getting out of the back of the van with rifles. And then the van drove away, leaving me alone with these masked strangers. I remember waking up after that, confused and disoriented with a pounding headache. I felt the grass on my hands and I started to look around. Once the blurriness left my eyes, I realized I was in my front yard. I immediately ran inside and called my husband, screaming and crying. He told me to calm down and that he couldn't understand me. After taking some deep breaths and forcing myself to calm down, I was able to tell him what happened while holding back tears. I told him I thought it had something to do with the strange lights that I had seen in the sky. "What are you talking about?" he asked me. "The blue light and the green explosion that I told you about earlier," I screamed. But there was a pause. "What light are you talking about?" He told me I must be in shock from the trauma and I needed to call 911. He had no recollection of me calling him earlier that night. So this experience has caused me a lot of suffering and confusion. My husband tries to be here for me, but he doesn't really understand. I think about that experience daily, and when I tell people, not many of them believe me. In fact, it has cost me a lot, including some friends and family, my career, my credibility, basically everything. I hope that I can soon heal from this experience and get some closure. I really need to move on with my life and pull everything back together. Anyway, I love your show, Lilith, and thank you for inspiring me to reach out about this experience. Thank you again.